Hi, this is Abdelnaser Eid. I'm a senior security engineer in Tenable, and today we'll be talking about the risk-based vulnerability management. Also, we will differentiate it from the legacy vulnerability assessment exercise and how it is beneficial to have a mature and solid vulnerability management program in any organization to achieve the most and ultimate cybersecurity hygiene in that environment. Almost on daily basis, we hear and see a lot of news about cybersecurity attacks and breaches. These attacks does not exclude any sector or any organization from being a potential target. For example, we hear a lot about some attacks that is targeting the healthcare sector. Definitely, as we know that any attack or any attacker will start to look for any weak or vulnerable asset or entry point for his target. Once he identifies that weak or vulnerable asset or application, he definitely will start to do the exercise of doing the attack. He will gain access. Once he is in, he will start to do some lateral movement to make sure that he is controlling the environment, and he has multiple options in case we caught him and we kicked him out of certain assets. So he will have alternative way to keep his footprint inside the organization. Most of the time, the ultimate goal, either it will be to exfiltrate some information, to get some sensitive data out of that organization. On the other hand, sometimes the target behind these cyber attacks could be disturbing some services. In all cases, the damage will happen to the organization, and the loss could be a direct financial loss, or it could be some reputation or nationwide disruption or loss as well. So if we go back one step and see how the usual people looks at the vulnerability. Most of the time, they just do ad hoc scan for their environment, and they think that it is a good approach. So once we say like running an ad hoc necessary scans or vulnerability assessment, that doesn't mean that we have a full and mature vulnerability management program in our environment. Also, going forward to the remediation and solving issues, doing an ad hoc patching as well doesn't mean that we have a good remediation plan, and it's not the proper way to remediate the issues that we discover. So that leads us to think about the new trend and the next generation of doing vulnerability management, which is combining the traditional way of discovering the vulnerabilities and linking it to the risk behind those vulnerabilities. So the risk, it will be directly attached to the business value, the business outcomes, and the business objectives. So the ultimate goal to discover all the weaknesses, all the vulnerabilities, but we will try to reflect these findings and try to associate the risk behind those vulnerabilities. So it is a continuous process. It's not like one single task to be done once a year or twice a year. It's a continuous process, starting from the discovery, moving to the assessment, doing prioritization for our findings. Then we will distribute the work to multiple teams so they can do remediation. And after that, we will do the measurement to see if our finding, our remediation is the proper way forward. So we will just discuss each of these steps in details now. So the discovery, it's very basic in the cybersecurity hygiene. We all know that if we don't know about certain asset, or if we don't know about certain service that it is existing in our environment, definitely we will not be able to protect it. So it's a very obvious stage that we need to maximize our visibility into our assets, into our services, and the weaknesses associated to those. So this is the first step, to do a proper discovery. So we can use one or multiple tools to do this discovery. This could be a regular vulnerability scan, or it could be a CMDB solution that can discover it. So we have multiple techniques or let's say tools to gain this visibility. Also, we have some processes behind, so we need to understand and identify our scope. Technically, and definitely the most recommended way is to include every single asset that has an IP or connectivity in the environment in our scope. So it's not recommended as well always to start with a small portion of the environment or certain assets or doing sampling. So it's better to do a full coverage for all assets in the environment. Then we will map the criticality of the asset value, how this asset is related to our business, and so on. So there is some weaknesses, or this will address some weaknesses in the cybersecurity. Let's say one of it is the permissions from asset owners. So we need to gain those permissions, and we have to do a proper planning for the scan windows. So this will help us to do an automated way without disturbing the operational side of the organization. So these points we have to take into consideration once we plan for our discovery. If we pass this stage and we discovered all the assets with all services, then we discovered the vulnerabilities on that, then we need to do we need to go to the next step, which is the assessment. So for this discovery, again, it's we have to define the scope, and we have to look exactly which segments is more critical for us to start with. And definitely this should have visibility from the top level management, and they have to be like all aware about what is happening in our exercise. Then we can be able to start in doing a full discovery exercise for our environment. Once we do that, we will move to the assessment. The assessment can be done through multiple technologies as well and multiple tools. The point here, the assessment needs to cover all kinds of assets. We know that nowadays the environments get very complex. So we have multiple operating systems, multiple applications. We have even different kind of assets. It's not all about normal and traditional IT assets. Now we have a hot topic, which is the operational technology assets, which is something related to the oil and gas, the energy sectors, the utilities, the airports, the navigation systems. So all these organizations, they have some sort of customized and specific assets that it is not a traditional IT assets such as a laptop or Windows server or even Linux server. So we have to choose the proper tool to do the assessment for those assets and the associated vulnerabilities. Then we have to decide in our assessment process how deep we have to go and analyze and discover the vulnerabilities, and how often we have to run those scans. So these are very important points to keep in mind once we plan our assessment exercise. So this will address major topics, which is lack of visibility and immature plans. For example, as we mentioned, the maturity of the cybersecurity program is very important. And if we are talking in specific about the assessment or vulnerability assessment, there will be multiple factors that will decide how mature is our exercise. For example, are we doing a full authenticated scans for all assets, or majority of our scans are without credentials? Also, what is the percentage or what is the number of plugins that we are utilizing in our scans? Are we always just rely on a limited number of plugins that is, for example, looking after Windows vulnerabilities? or we are trying to do the scans using more and more plugins. The more plugins we use, the more vulnerabilities we discover, and the more platforms we cover. Then the frequency of our scans. Are we doing these scans once a year, twice a year, on monthly basis, or every week? This also will decide how mature our program is. So the scan frequency, the authentication exercise, as well as the number of plugins used to do the scans, all these combined will help us to reach for mature asset or mature vulnerability exercise. So some recommendations to be very flexible once we are talking about the assessment. So we can use multiple technologies, multiple tools, because each one will look to the asset from different angle. We have to try to make it automated because we don't want to add more, let's say, headache or operational headache on the teams. So we also need to keep in mind that the assessment frequency should be enough to cover the dynamic changes that are happening in the field. So we have to keep our eyes open about these points as well. Then, once we pass the discovery and assessment stages, it's very important right now to prioritize. And this is exactly where the risk came to the picture and become very attached to the vulnerability management concept. So it's becoming more about the risk-based vulnerability management program rather than the vulnerability management alone. So this will associate the technical and the business values or outcomes together in order to come up with a clear and efficient action plan according to the priority of the vulnerability or the risk associated to that vulnerability. So this usually the prioritization doesn't rely on tools only. It also requires to have some sort of threat intelligence feeds. Also, it needs some data science and machine learning, plus some inputs from the organization engineers themselves, because there is no solution on earth that fits all. So each different organization, they will have different interests, different way of handling and organizing their assets. So they have to have some kind of input and tweaking to the solution. So this will solve the problem of having the same vulnerability treated equally on all assets, which is not really logical. For example, if we have the same vulnerability in two different assets, one of them is protected by 2 or 3 layers of security tools, we should not treat this asset equally with another asset just sitting or doesn't have that much of security layers to protect it. So we have to differentiate between assets, even if these assets have the same exact vulnerability. So we have to have something to prioritize and tell us, okay, start with this asset first because it's more important for the business. Then if you have time, go again to the other assets. So we have to differentiate in our remediation procedure between assets, even if they have the same level of vulnerabilities or let's say risk value. So if you are talking about, if we can see this output from the Tenable IO platform, on the right hand side, we can see that there is a specific rating for the asset itself. So by this, the solution automatically will try to assign a weight, or let's say a value for that asset, taking into consideration the position of that asset in the environment and the functionality of that asset. So it will try to assign an automatic asset criticality rating. However, as we mentioned, the organization engineers, they should have the ability to tweak and to do some customization for that asset criticality, because they are the ones who know exactly how this asset is important to their environment. At the same time, we can see on the lower side the VPR key drivers. So this VPR is a vulnerability priority rating. It is a rating that is developed by Tenable. It consumes more than 170 different factors in order to assign the new score for individual vulnerability. So these factors comes from the CBSS scoring system. It comes from the threat intel that we collect from the market, as well as some commercial feeds that we get from other vendors. So we apply some machine learning and data science to those factors in order to assign the VPR score. So this VPR score really in the threat intel feeds in order to make the scoring dynamic, which means that, for example, for particular vulnerability, the score might change overnight according to what we see in the field. So if this vulnerability become used in certain attack or group, they are trying to develop exploitation using that vulnerability, then we can increase the score for that vulnerability. So this will have some indication for the organization about the potential risk of that vulnerability. So regarding the prioritization, we have to take into consideration the business criticality for the assets. Also, we need to automate the process as much as we can, plus having some static input. It's very important. Plus, these prioritization should be related to our policies and procedures. If our policies and procedures doesn't cater or doesn't help and doing that, this prioritization, we have to do the needed changes in order to make the prioritization going smooth and in the right direction. Also, we have to make sure that whatever we get as an output of these prioritization, it is doable. The teams can follow that prioritization in order to achieve the maximum level of security in the shortest period. After doing that, it's obviously we reach the point of doing remediation. So it's very important to have a clear remediation plan. This will help the teams to secure the assets in an efficient way. So the remediation doesn't only require a vulnerability management platform. It is a shared effort between multiple tools. One of them is the vulnerability management platform that can discover and prioritize the vulnerabilities. The ticketing system will help in this stage by assigning the tickets to the proper groups, to the proper engineers. Also, the patch management solution can be one solution to do this remediation process. So as we can see, it's a shared effort between multiple technologies, and even with there can be some other tools or products or technologies can be involved in the remediation stage. So once we have those tools in place, integrated with each other, having a clear workflow between these technologies, we have to determine a proper action for each vulnerability. So this action can be taken according to the criticality of that asset and criticality of that particular vulnerability and its effect to the organization processes in total. So this will require the teams to agree on a reasonable action plan, and there should be no conflict between the security team and the system administrators or network team as well. So all teams should be working with each other, talking to each other in order to reach to an efficient action plan. As we can see from this output that we might have a lot of finding or vulnerabilities for certain asset or certain environment. So what we need is to have a clear action plan and clear solution per vulnerability. So this is the job or the duty of a mature vulnerability management platform or mature vulnerability management vendor to provide the maximum information around each individual vulnerability. The description, the proposed solution, any references, or even the actual output that we got from the asset, which told us that there is a vulnerability itself. So the more information we can give, the easier become for the teams to solve the problem. So we have to automate this, and as you can see and notice, almost in all stages, the automation is the key behind that successful exercise. So we have to try to automate every stage as much as we can, and this will help us to speed up the process of remediation, and it will lower the headache and the duties on individual engineers and teams. So once this is done, the automation, identifying the remediation steps, it's very important because this will simplify the exercise as well. Understanding the business dependencies as well. This is very important. So these will help us to reach to the last stage, which is the measurement of our remediation efficiency. So this simply can be done by a clear reporting and analysis tool. And usually this kind of feature is embedded in any mature risk-based vulnerability management platform. So clear reporting will help the top management to decide and to see that, okay, our investment was in the right place in multiple technologies, for example. Our teams are following the SLAs and they are following the best practices that we agreed on, for example. So these measurement will tell both technical and management team how efficient the organization is doing against fighting the vulnerabilities and the risk behind those vulnerabilities. So this will come as dashboards or even reports, and this will show both parties the KPIs that they agreed on and how is the progress behind those KPIs. So as you can see, the dashboard is very important to be informative, to be customizable, to carry the level of information related to the audience, to the proper audience. If we are talking to the top management, they mainly interested to see high-level information, statistical information, and trending information as well, to make sure that the work is being done in a smooth way. The technical teams, definitely, they will be interested in statistical information, but more they will be interested to dig deep into the technical details of the asset, the technical details of the vulnerability, and so on. So as we mentioned in the beginning, this life cycle is not one-time work. It's a continuous effort. So measuring the efficiency of the solution should have a clear metrics that can be measured and can be identified. Also, these measurement should be consistent, which means we are doing the same measurement or the same remediation in a steady state, and we can continuously evaluate and see the efficiency of those steps that we apply. So as we mentioned, each audience looks for different kind of information. So we need to send and customize the appropriate report or dashboard for each audience. So that was all about the life cycle of risk-based vulnerability management model. It's a continuous process again. It starts from discovery, ends with the measuring or the efficiency of the solution, and again and again and again. So it's a continuous process. However, This will make sure that the organization is lowering the attack surface. This will limit the potential risk that can be utilized by the cyber criminals to attack and penetrate any organization. Thank you very much for listening to this recording, and it's my pleasure to connect with you. This is my email address. You can reach me anytime for any question. Thank you very much, and have a good day.